Hello and welcome back to the Atlas Agency, a channel all about Arkham Horror, the card game. I'm your host Brandon, back today to share commentary on the player cards from the Mythos pack, The City of Archives, pack number 4 in the Forgotten Age cycle. The City of Archives actually has the fewest new player cards of any Mythos pack released to date, with just 8 new player cards. 2 of the classes, Guardians and Survivors, only get 1 card each in this pack, while Rogues, Mystics, and Seekers get 2 cards each. Since there are fewer cards in this pack, I think there's a little more pressure than usual on the cards that are here to stand out as interesting or useful. So how does the pack hold up? Well, let's dive into the 8 cards, starting with the Rogue cards. Both of the Rogue cards in this pack are new events. The first is Slip Away, a new level 0 event. 2 resources, Evade, add your intellect to your skill value for this evasion attempt. If you succeed by 2 or more, and the evaded enemy is non-elite, it does not ready during the next upkeep phase. So basically, this is a way to turn 1 successful evasion into 2 rounds worth of exhaustion. That's not too crazy, but it seems like it would be useful often enough that you might be able to justify this in a deck if you wanted to try to fit it in. It's probably pretty easy to justify in Forgotten Age. It seems like this might have more value also on the higher difficulty settings, where it's beneficial to be able to compress what's basically 2 evasions into a single test. I get a very Harry Potter vibe from the artwork in this one, with the giant basilisk, but I like it. I think it's cool that we have some of the Forgotten Age influences spilling over into the player cards, and we get to have a monster shown that's somewhat different from a lot of the foes that we're used to seeing depicted on these sorts of player cards. The pack's other Rogue card is a level 1 economy event, Payday, resource cost of 0, gain 1 resource for each action you perform this turn, including this one. If it's your turn, end your turn. And it has the illicit and faded traits. Faded, by the way, seems to sort of be the Arkham equivalent of the Netrunner LCG's terminal trait. All the faded cards released so far have had this if it's your turn, end your turn line. So it's sort of the opposite of Guardian's bold trait. You want to play faded cards at the end of your turn, if at all possible. I really like the design on this card. In a vacuum, it's worse than our benchmark economy card, Emergency Cash. If you're not running other cards or effects to support it by generating extra actions, it's basically an emergency cash that ends your turn. But in a deck that is built around taking those extra actions, it becomes a worthwhile alternative to Hot Streak or Emergency Cash. It's a little less reliable, but it has a higher potential upside if things come together right. There are plenty of good cards at this point for getting those extra actions. There's the basic staples like Leo DeLuca and Quick Thinking, or once you have experience to spend, Police Badge or Ace in the Hole. Finn Edwards, thanks to his free evade action, starts out at a natural advantage with Payday. As long as you have something to evade, you can get up to 4 actions with no other help. Payday also has the illicit trait, which matters to Finn thanks to his smuggled goods signature card, so Finn may be one of the best candidates to use this. If you are Finn and you use that extra evade action and you play an Ace in the Hole, that's 7 actions. So 7 credits from Payday, which is in line with the gain from the top tier economy card, level 4 Hot Streak. Also, the illicit trait means that if you're running the card Fence, you can make Payday fast, in which case you wouldn't even have to spend one of your actions on it. You could just do it for free at the end of your turn. Thumbs up from me on this one. I think it's going to be fun to play. It's more work to set up, but I think that's part of the fun, and racking up a big Payday score will be kind of a mini game or achievement unto itself. Moving on to the Mystic class, our first Mystic card is Sacrifice. Level 1 event, 0 resources. Discard a Mystic asset you control, then draw 3 cards or gain 3 resources or any combination thereof. The flavor text says, the first step is the hardest, and you probably assumed the look of doubt on this woman's face was uncertainty about whether she's willing to sacrifice this poor little goat. Actually, though, she could care less about the goat. She's just second-guessing herself for running Kukri as her weapon. My initial reaction to this card was positive. I was thinking this would be a nice way to put some fuel back in your tank in the mid to late game. It's pretty common for Mystics to have a card around that time they're willing to throw away, whether that's a spell depleted of charges or an ally who's maybe racked up a little too much doom. So with the exception of the early game, it's probably not too hard to come up with a suitable sacrifice for this, and the flexibility of being able to mix and match between cards and resources is nice. But the more I think about this one, the more I'm not sure about it. If you're using it for just cards, you're spending an action and a card to draw 3 cards. That's only netting you 1 more than if you just spent the action to draw, though you do get the benefit of a little deck thinning. And with the resource gain side, as a Mystic, I often want a boost like that early on. I'll often use Uncage the Soul to help me afford to play 2 assets on turn 1, and this is not going to help there. So with the added hoop of having to sacrifice a card, and the possibility that you might get stuck not being able to play it if you can't, I'm unsure whether this is really that exciting, just for the ability to mix and match. It's at least less appealing to me now than when I first started thinking about it. Next up, we have Crystalline Elder Sign. This is a level 3 Mystic asset, 3 resources to play it, Item, Relic, and Blessed traits. It occupies the accessory slot. Seal the +1 token or the Elder Sign token, so when you play this you have to remove your choice of one of those beneficial Chaos tokens from the bag. In return, Crystalline Elder Sign gives you +1 to all 4 of your stats. The thing to note about this card is that while its upside applies only to its owner, its downside, the removal of one of those good tokens from the Chaos bag, that's shared by the entire group. So while this is normally going to be a very good card in a solo game or maybe even in a 2-player game, in a big multiplayer game it won't go over as well. You may get some dirty looks, or you may see people start to run, "You handle this one." I think this thing's pretty cool though. It's a neat use of Seal in a way that runs contrary to how most of the other Seal cards work, and boosting all 4 stats is pretty nice, especially if you are playing solo, since solo often requires you to act as a generalist and be able to do a little bit of everything. For the Seeker class, this pack gives us the upgraded versions of the Forgotten Age Deluxe Box's unidentified card, Ancient Stone. Just a little refresher, it's tradition for Seekers to get a card with either the unidentified or untranslated subtitle in a Cycles Deluxe box. These cards always require you to complete some kind of in-game task in order to unlock the right to buy the upgraded versions of the card, which are always released later in the cycle. In Dunwich, this was Strange Solution, in Carcosa it was Archaic Glyphs, and here in Forgotten Age we have Ancient Stone. Ancient Stone is a little different from those previous cards in 2 ways. First, it's level 1 rather than level 0, so you have to spend experience in order to even start down the path of unlocking its upgrades. And second, the identification is not just pass or fail, it records the measure of your success. To identify the stone, you have to pass an investigate test based on the shroud of your location +3, and you record the difficulty of that test in parentheses alongside your note that you identified the stone. City of Archives gives us the payoff to all of that work. We get 2 upgrades to Ancient Stone here. One is Knowledge of the Elders, and the other is Minds in Harmony. Both of these are level 4 assets, but remember you'll be upgrading this from the level 1 Ancient Stone, so it's actually just a 3 experience step. Both versions cost 2 resources and occupy 1 hand slot. They have the Item and Relic traits, and you can only include them in your deck by upgrading them from Ancient Stone unidentified, and only if you have, quote, identified the stone in your campaign log. They both have uses, X secrets, where X is the number in parentheses next to you have identified the stone. So the tougher the difficulty of the test you use to solve Ancient Stone, the more secrets it'll get when it's played. Everything I've read so far is the same between both upgraded versions. Where they differ is in their final ability and in their skill icons. Ancient Stone Knowledge of the Elders says reaction. When you draw any number of cards, spend that many secrets to deal that much damage to an enemy at your location. Ancient Stone Minds in Harmony says reaction. When you draw any number of cards, spend that many secrets to heal that much horror from a card at your location. Knowledge of the Elders has 2 intellect icons, and Minds in Harmony has 2 willpower instead. I had basically ignored Ancient Stone prior to this pack. These days I'm finding myself less excited about taking these cards blind without knowing what they lead to. I'd rather just wait until I'm replaying the campaign with full knowledge, and this cycle it was a little easier to ignore Ancient Stone since the base version cost experience and didn't have to be considered in the initial deck list. But wow, it has my attention now. Let's start with Knowledge of the Elders, which is just nuts. Test-free damage is always very good, and I think even with a low number of secrets, and in a deck that's not particularly tuned to take advantage of this card would still be very strong. Maybe still one of the strongest offensive support cards in the game. In a deck that is built around it, when it has a good number of secrets, I think it'll be amazing. The hoop it gives you is that it's triggered by drawing cards. Natively, you have your upkeep draw and your draw action to trigger that, though that draw action might subject you to an attack of opportunity. But so many other player cards draw cards in every class that everybody's going to have plenty of options for triggering this. Any manual dexterity or overpower type skill on a successful test, yours or an ally's can trigger an extra damage here. Burst draw like Preposterous Sketches, Cryptic Research, or Laboratory Assistant can give you a big test-free hit, though with the non-fast options, again, you might have to contend with an attack of opportunity. Arcane Initiate lets you ping once a turn at fast speed. I guess if you can take Sacrifice, that would give you the flexibility to hit the exact damage amount you needed from 1 to 3 cards and take the rest as resources. So lots of different possibilities. This is a great scavenging target. The fact that it occupies a hand slot may actually make it an easier to scavenge card than the weapon version of Strange Solution, which doesn't occupy any slot. With Ancient Stone in one hand and anything else in your first hand, you could bump Ancient Stone to your discard pile by playing a Magnifying Glass level 1 into its slot. Then, after you scavenge the stone, Magnifying Glass has that ability to bump itself back into your hand, so you can reopen the slot and give yourself the Magnifying Glass back so that you can do the whole thing over again later when you need to refresh Ancient Stone again. So yeah, I think this card will be very strong, and I kind of suspect that in the right build, Minty Fan might be a top-tier monster slayer now, thanks to this card. The other upgrade option, Minds in Harmony, is definitely less exciting just because it's not carving up enemies for you, but I think it's still very good at what it does. It's just 2 resources a card and the action to play it to set it into motion, and then over time, just off your natural upkeep draw, depending on your secret count, you're probably looking at least 4 healing, possibly 7 or more, and that horror can be off any card at your location, not just your investigator, and if you need to, you can draw cards to accelerate that effect. That seems to me to be quite good. It's a little like the Peter Sylvester effect. This is going to be a great card for Carolyn Fern, since she can take level 1 Seeker cards, she can get the unidentified version of the stone, and then once it's identified, she's allowed to take this one because it fits her Heals Horror deck building category. And since it's the only eligible upgrade for Ancient Stone for her, she can cheat the random selection of Shrewd Analysis and get 2 copies of Minds in Harmony for the price of 1. I haven't had a chance to play either of these upgrades yet. As I said, I kind of ignored Ancient Stone at the beginning of the cycle, but just looking at these and talking about them now, I really want to see them in action. I also want to mention we had a few cards earlier this cycle that interacted with secrets. Truth from Fiction was one of those cards. That was 2 resources to add 2 secrets to an asset. That seems now to be a very worthwhile card for a deck that builds towards either of these, especially Knowledge of the Elders. Moving on to the Survivor class, they only get 1 card in this pack, and that card is On Your Own. On Your Own is a level 3 card, 2 resource asset with the talent trait, limit 1 per investigator, discard On Your Own if you control an asset that takes up an ally slot. Reaction, when you play a Survivor event, exhaust On Your Own to reduce that event's cost by 2. So basically you're sacrificing your ability to have an ally asset in exchange for a once-a-turn cost reduction for Survivor events. I've played around with this just a little bit with Wendy, and I think it has potential. It is kind of painful to have to give up playing allies, especially since allies tend to be some of the more exciting cards in the game, but in the right deck, I think this discount will be useful enough to be worth it. This could be useful for Dark Horse builds, where it would enable you to play a lot of events when you're at 0 resources. The majority of Survivor events are 1 or 2 cost. Also, if you're planning a combo deck that gets up to Will to Survive and True Survivor shenanigans using Resourceful, well, Will to Survive and True Survivor are both among the few Survivor events that do cost more than 2 resources. Playing them repeatedly is expensive, but On Your Own makes that much more affordable and sustainable. So I think this is a card we will be seeing in certain builds in the future. The final card in the pack is its Soul Guardian card, M1918 BAR. BAR, by the way, stands for Browning Automatic Rifle. The M1918 is a level 4 Guardian weapon. It's a 5-resource double-handed firearm. Uses, 8 ammo. Action, spend 1 to 5 ammo. Fight, you get plus X combat for this attack. Instead of its standard damage, this attack deals X damage. X is the amount of ammo spent as part of this ability's cost. So you get to decide how much damage you want to try to do when you use this, up to 5, but a 1 ammo spend is only going to deal 1 damage. I think this card is really interesting. It kind of flips the ammo economy that we're used to seeing on its head. It comes with a lot of shots, but on its own, each ammo isn't worth as much. Compare that to Shotgun with just 2 ammo, where each of them is very valuable. I don't think it's necessarily better than the other weapons we already have in the high-level firearm bucket, but flipping the value of ammo like that makes it interesting enough to be worth exploring. It opens the door for you to play with a few other cards that don't see a lot of use. For example, your refill card of choice here is probably Contraband, not Extra Ammunition. Contraband doubling the base ammo from 8 to 16, assuming you're playing it before you start firing it. This also might be the first card where the Eat Lead event from last cycle really makes sense. That one has you spend X additional ammo tokens from a gun when you use it to reveal X extra Chaos tokens, and pick one to resolve. That didn't make a lot of sense for a big gun with just 2 or 3 ammo. Here, though, you might have a big 4 or 5 damage shot where it's worth playing Eat Lead and spending 1 or 2 extra ammo for insurance against a bad pull. I also want to mention Custom Ammunition, which is popular enough on its own with other guns, but here it lets you stretch all of your ammo further. Plus 1 damage against monster enemies means you can do 2 damage to a monster even on a 1 ammo spend. Overall, while this thing isn't a game changer, I do think it's going to be fun, and in the right builds, I think it should fill its role fine. And with that, we've covered all the new player cards in City of Archives. As I said, this pack does have fewer player cards than any other Mythos pack we've seen so far, but between Crystalline Elder Sign, Ancient Stone Knowledge of the Elders, the BAR, On Your Own, and Payday, I think this pack still manages to provide interesting things to all 5 of the classes. I hope you enjoyed this look. As always, thanks for watching the Atlas Agency, and good luck in your own investigations of the Forgotten Age.